When we hear people in their own voices, we become more invested and more engaged. And that effect is even more powerful when we see images along with that audio because it furthers that emotional connection. We see it with our own eyes, and so we respond to it. And sometimes the images used in a story can take on even more importance than the story itself. There's a famous political story about this phenomenon from the 1980s. Back in 1984, when Ronald Reagan was running for re-election, Leslie Stahl of CBS ran a lengthy story about a disconnect between what Reagan was saying publicly and what his administration was doing. She included some pretty hard-hitting examples. She talked about how he tried to deflect attention from unpopular positions, like cutting budgets for the disabled or cutting subsidized housing for the elderly, and by staging elaborate photo ops that conflicted with their policies. She included video of those photo ops showing Reagan with farmers and kids and elderly people and supporters waving American flags. She thought the piece was so hard-hitting that her White House contacts would freeze her out, but the piece aired and she waited for the blowback, and they called her right away, but not to say they were angry with her piece. On the contrary, they thanked her for the story. "Way to go, kiddo," they said. "What a great story. We loved it." She said, "What?" Well, he went on, the aide that called her. He told her how she had provided them with 5 minutes of free media, but still she didn't get it, and so he told her, "Nobody heard what you said. You guys in television land haven't figured it out, have you? The pictures are powerful and emotional, and they override, if not completely drown out, the sound. Leslie, I mean it. Nobody heard you." Pictures are tremendously powerful. We see a lot of different kinds of videos, straight up news stories, live TV, documentaries, ads. It's all around us. When you're working with news video, there are some rules. As always, you want to tell a story, but with video, you need to make it both visual and audible, and those two things have to go together. To keep it simple for your viewers, you want to boil it down to one single concept, and then let the action speak for itself, because your viewer has the ability to see it, which allows you to play up emotion and connect through those images. When you're working with video and ads, the principles are the same. Again, you need to have a single concept, although this one is creative, and you want to match your visuals and audio or music to each other and the concept. The concept here has to be original. You want a mix of elements in a video story. First is voiceover. This is narration from the reporter or anchor or the people interviewed. As the word implies, this audio runs over other video. There also needs to be SOT, sound on tape. These are the sound bites and interviews giving emotion, analysis, and opinion to your story. You can use graphics to tell us who's talking at the bottom of the screen, but you'll also want to introduce those people before they talk. Then there's nat sound. You want to be sure you get that natural sound along with the images to help you set that scene. That helps create that emotional connection. And then finally there's B-roll. That's supplemental video that you use to help vary the images and set the scene. It's not always taken directly for the story you're doing. If you were doing a story about the Stoughton train crash a couple months from now, you'd use some of the B-roll of the crash site in that update. When you're shooting video and photos, you also need to think about composition, and you really want to think in thirds. And there are a couple ways to think about this. So first is visual fields and focus. Focus is what we think of as the most interesting element in the field, with the field being in the image or the photo. So first there are wide shots. These are the big establishing shots we see of, for example, Camp Randall Stadium, showing us the energy and the color that comes with a crowd that size. And I'm showing some stills here, but the same principles apply for video. But then there are medium shots. These give us more detail in a middle range. So you get more detail than in a wide shot, but still nothing very specific. And then there are tight shots. These are the close-ups. They let us get right in the face of the people being featured, and we get more in-depth detail in a close-up glimpse. Each one of these accomplishes something different, which is why you want to use a mix of all of these in your work. When you're shooting video, you want to think about gathering all these different kinds of shots. So you need wide shots, medium shots, and tight shots for every piece that you're shooting. You also need to think about thirds within the visual field. When you look at an image, and when you're creating an image, you want to cut it into 3 sections, both horizontally and vertically. And the reason you do that is to avoid putting the focus on the most interesting thing right in the middle of the field. If you do that, it's just really boring to look at. Instead, you want to put the interesting point on one of the intersections of the grid lines. These images become much more dynamic and effective because that focus is varied. In this photo, we followed this cheerleader's pom-pom out of the frame. There's some action there, and the way it's composed sets up that action. Another consideration when composing video and photo is the angle at which you're shooting. You can shoot something straight on, but you can also approach it from the left or the right, or from down shooting up, or from up shooting down. So shots from the left and right are more visually interesting than those from straight on, and shots from above and below can create some strong visual effects. So if you shoot from the top down, you're minimizing your subject, and if you shoot from the bottom up, you can make it look larger than life or more powerful. So just by how you angle your shot, you can evoke some emotion from the person viewing that image. Other techniques for making your shots more interesting: you can zoom in on something of interest, or you can use the camera to pan across a scene. So move the camera from left to right or right to left. A tilt might also help you build some visual interest. That's where you move the camera up and down on something or someone. But when you do this, you just don't want to do it too fast and make your viewer seasick. You also want to be sure you give the viewer enough time to take in the image, so hold it for a few seconds on either side. You also want to think about what will be the establishing shot for your story. So these set the scene and the tone for what's to follow. And here you want to think about what the most visually interesting thing you can show your viewer would be. So just as your writing showcases the most interesting piece of news in the lead, your video should kick off with the most visually interesting images. A few more tips for working with video. You want to hold shots for more than 10 seconds. Make sure you're holding them long enough for the viewer to really absorb what's happening. Keep the camera as steady as possible when you're shooting, so use a tripod. When you're setting up a shot, try to get the camera as close to the subject as you can, or get the frame close up on that subject, and follow the same rules that we talked about for composing still photos. So if you're interviewing someone, don't just have their face in the middle of the screen, place them to the side and have them talk across the screen. And then always monitor your sound to be sure that you're registering audio at a level that you can use in your video. Also, give your images and your video some room to breathe. That means you don't always have to write over every frame. So the pictures and the video and the audio can tell a story on their own. So think of it like when you're working with audio and letting the natural sound play for a few seconds without talking over it. You can let the video play and let the viewer hear the natural sound before you jump in with your reporting and your narration.